Welcome, everyone. And thank you, Alina, for joining us. So Alina and I are going to do kind of a question and answer sort of idea. So if you guys have questions as we move along, feel free to raise your hand, throw something into the chat. And yeah, Alina is just going to give you some of her ideas. So Alina, let's start with what is block scheduling?
Okay, so it can be done in a couple of different ways, but the way that we did block scheduling at Proctor this past year is we did 4 blocks that were 80 minutes long, and we had those classes for the fall semester. And then for the spring semester, we had 4 different classes for 80 minutes a day through the end of the year. So the students were able to still take 8 classes, which it's actually more than we used to be on. When we were on an 8-period day, one of the periods was the dedicated support time, like callback time. So they really had a chance to take 7 classes. In this model, they get to take 8 courses. So they get basically an extra elective, which is kind of cool. And then as a teacher, I taught for 3 of the blocks, and one of the blocks was my prep period. So time-wise, it works out decently similarly to a regular period schedule. The minutes are off, a little bit, but in the end, it all kind of works out. So that's structurally, that's how it looks. Depending on how the specific bell schedules get set up, block schedules typically are anywhere from 80 to 100 minutes per block. I don't know if the team finalized the minutes for next year of what it's going to be, but I know we did 80 this past year, and that was pretty good. So,
Alina and folks, it will be 80.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Thanks, so, Jay. Alina, that means that you have an entire 80-minute block that is your prep period. You don't have that split up or taken away or any of that. That whole 80 minutes is that time for you to prepare for your blocks.
Yes. So for example, in the fall semester, I taught my astronomy class first block for 80 minutes. Then they passed to their next classes. Second block was my prep. So I had 80 minutes straight of prep time. Then we moved to third block. That was my AP physics class. So we did that for 80 minutes. And then we had lunchtime. And that's where this past year, that's where we had put in our advisory. So we did lunch and advisory in the middle of the day. So they had half an hour of lunch, half an hour of advisory. I believe, if I understand correctly, that the advisory part is getting moved to the morning for next year. But yeah, Jay's nodding. Okay, so I did remember that correctly. So for next year, the timing will be a little different, but there's still that advisory callback, win time, whatever you want to call it, somewhere in the schedule. And then after lunch, we had fourth block, which was in my fall semester was my chemistry class. So I did that for the entire fall semester, every day. And then, like I said, when we changed semesters, I got a whole fresh slate of classes, a whole fresh slate of kids. At the end of the semester, we posted that was final grades. That was the end of the course, posted grades, and then we got a whole fresh, clean slate for the spring. Kind of more like the model of the way that colleges work. So in college, you take a class kind of intensely for a semester, and then you do your finals and you get your grades posted and you take new stuff in the spring.
Awesome. Thank you, Lena.
I see Jess has a question.
Oh, I don't see everyone's hands.
Yeah, so my question is, I think I talked to somebody, I'm sorry, my daughter is screaming in the background, so I apologize. So with the classes in the fall, after that, we usually have the kids try to hit proficiencies. So I don't know, Jay, if maybe you can answer that, but are we going to be having those 5 extra days at the end of the semester, or how is that going to work?
Have not even discussed that, to be perfectly honest.
I can tell you what we did at Proctor this year, because we did do something this year. So what we did this past year, and because it sounds like that's to be determined for next year, but just so that there's ideas of what we did. At Proctor, we still did exams, but it was it was so that, teachers who wanted to give an exam could give one. Otherwise, classes did final projects. Like a lot of classes, especially in proficiency based, you do a final project. So that was mostly what it was. But we had the schedule set up so that there were 2 days that we ran a kind of traditional exam schedule. So on the one day they had block 1 exam, then block 2 exam, then it was dismissal. So it was a half day for students. But we stayed, and that afternoon was support time for students who needed extra work. We did the same thing the next day for blocks 3 and 4. And then after that, there was yet another day that there was nothing scheduled except student support. So we had a half day afternoon, and then a full day all available for what you're talking about, Jess, of doing those, that extra time, those extra assignments, getting those extra opportunities to demonstrate proficiency before the semester ends. Because they're only taking either 3 or 4 classes, there's, unless they really dug themselves a big hole and slacked off the entire semester, we had almost all of our students were able to use their time effectively. And we had only a handful of students that got an incomplete for the semester. We did our own incomplete kind of policy thing was that at that point, after all of that makeup time, if they still weren't done, they had the choice of either, okay, let my grade stand and I didn't pass the class, or they could take an incomplete. And then it was up to them on their own to make a plan with their teacher of when they were going to submit their remaining summative assessments to demonstrate proficiency. And as long as they followed that plan and turned in what they needed to, we would then submit for a grade change for them. But at that point, once you had used all that time up, it was kind of on your own. We weren't responsible for still trying to jump through hoops and everything. And so we did the same thing at the end of the year here. So we had our exam days, and then we had the makeup day for students to do extra work. And then we actually, because there was that half day, we tacked on, that was another just half day of makeup stuff. And I know all of my students both semesters were able to, take care of everything that needed to. So they all were, I had one incomplete from the fall semester because of a medical issue, but that was kind of a normal one. But otherwise everyone got their stuff done and everything was fine. So, the fact that they're only focusing on either 3 or 4 classes at a time, depending on most of the students took 4 classes, but we had our seniors took 3, they were allowed to have a free period. So because they have less subjects they're focusing on, they were able to be more dedicated to getting those things done. And there was less to keep track of in terms of I've got to do this for this class and this for this class and this for this class. It's when you're only dealing with 4, it's essentially kind of half of for them. The workload is the same, but they're doing more assignments for one teacher. So it's just, I don't know, it's easier to keep track of for them. It's easier to keep track of for me. I know I felt so much more connected and on top of where each kid was because I see them so much more than normal. So, yeah. I hope that kind of answers. And again, that's an idea. That's what we did this year. It worked well. So, Jay and the Corey Valley admin team, I'm sure will discuss how they want to handle the end of the semester stuff, but that did work for us. So that's a plausible option.
That's awesome. Thank you, Lena. I think I noticed that there were some Pulteney High School folks on. Does anybody want to speak to how they have been doing things? If it's the same, different? Any ideas you want to share?
Hi, I'm from Pulteney High School, and we do things similar to that. Hi. We do things quite similar to what she was saying. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Alina, can you tell us a little bit about what an 80-minute time period looks like with your students? Because it sounds like a huge amount of time. And I've read a lot of different articles about things where people are just doing 10 minutes and then the rest of the time is you do your work or your homework or your whatever and kids are fooling around. And is that really what it looks like, or what does it look like for you?
It can look a lot of different ways. That's one of the beauties of having a huge chunk of time, is you have a lot of options. So, most of you guys probably know, I'm a science teacher. So for me, one of the most exciting things about a block is that I can actually do a full lab investigation with kids and not have to interrupt it. So under a traditional schedule, one day would be, going over stuff, learning the materials, maybe collecting some data. But then the next day we go back and analyze the data, but now there's been a gap in between, or, you just could never quite fit it all in. So now with the 80-minute block, we can do a full investigation, collect our data, and analyze the data while it's still fresh. So that part is really extra amazing. So sometimes I do spend the whole block on one activity because it's one of those super, super high engagement activities. Other times, depending on what it is that we're doing, we'll do a whole bunch of different smaller things. So I always start out class as a whole group, touch base about, okay, what's our plan for today? This year we had those little planners. So every class, when they came in, the planner was up on the board. So they saw, once again, like, hey, that's what's on the planner for today. And we would talk about it. And then at that point, depending on what the day was, some days we would start off with a group lesson on something. So, there's still time for direct instruction, but, keep it short. So maybe 15, maybe 20 minutes of going over some sort of concept or topic together. Then they would be able to move into some independent work time where they're practicing with whatever that is. But you don't want to then give them just the whole rest of the block to do that because they are teenagers. So they will not be able to focus on that one thing for that long. So you need to have a variety of different things that you're switching it up. So you can absolutely give them some, specific independent practice time for one topic, but then you want to have, for when they finish whatever that practice is, have some other type of activity for them to move into. So I tended to think about my 80-minute block as 4 20-minute chunks. That way I would do, we would get in, do our lesson for the first 20 minutes. Second 20 minutes might be practice that goes with that lesson. But then after that, it would be like, all right, guys, at this point, hop onto, this activity or this video or something like that. So you have some other type of high engagement thing for them to get into. And then at that point, you could either have like another engaging activity for afterwards, or maybe another round of practice connecting back to what you did before. You can also, in that last chunk of time, you can do reflection on the lesson from the day. That's a fantastic time to have students do, formative assessments or exit tickets to give you feedback on what they got out of their work for the day. It's also an awesome time to be able to sit down with your struggling kids, to be able to give them that extra attention that, okay, after the lesson, after the independent practice and this other high engagement activity, they're still struggling with whatever it is we're doing today. Let me sit down with you and work on this while students are working on something else. Another really key thing that I did that was crucial is having choice activities. So for every unit that I did, I had at the beginning of the unit, I would give the kids, hey, here's the list of all of your choice stuff for the unit. And whenever you have some downtime, go ahead and work on this stuff. Because they're teenagers, though I called it the choice stuff, I would tell them that by the end of the unit, you have to complete X number of items from the choice list. So that they knew that they got to pick which ones they do, but they still have to do some of them because otherwise they're going to want to do some of them anyway. Sorry. Some of our students are very highly motivated and wonderful. Some of them are less inclined to want to do activities. So then they do need that little reminder of like, oh, okay, I should complete 5 out of this list of 10 things. Okay. So that way when they have their downtime because, okay, I finished my practice, but it's not yet time for the next thing, they can pull out one of those other items to do. So things that ended up on my choice lists were things like, videos with some reflection questions, an article with, some comprehension questions or a chance to reflect on what they got out of the article. Science. So I love simulators. There are tons of amazing online simulators. So sometimes it would be, hey, play with this simulator. And sometimes there would be, like questions to go with it. Other times it would just be play with this simulator and tell me what you learned about it. So that way it really could be that fun exploratory time where they can spend as much or as little time playing with that simulator. And then they can show me, okay, what did I get out of playing with the simulator? So those are some examples of things. Depending on the grade level, I've found more middle school level stuff through working with, I see Alex is on the call. Alex is the middle school science teacher here, and she found so many amazing middle school level, shout out. She found so many amazing middle school level science things. So Hannah, I see you're on here too. If you guys haven't already, I'm sure Alex has shared stuff, but anyway. Yeah, so that way as they finish different things, they can go, there's all sorts of like science games and, other stuff like that. That's just super high engagement for kids. So they want to be able to go like play the game. And I'm sure that they have games in all of the different subject areas at this point, because that's just a thing. So, but it keeps the kids really engaged. So that way, if they finish something and you're not ready to go to your next whole group thing, they can always refer to that choice board. They can go get engaged in something. And they actually do when you pick things that are actually engaging for them. So that was a learning experience for me, figuring out, which things work better than others. Some stuff I thought, oh, this is so cool, the kids are going to love it. And then they do it and they're like, that was terrible. So then I'm like, okay, well, we won't use that video anymore. Like that content creator's no good. Get rid of that guy, find someone new. Alex,
we have a question from Philip Henry. He said, in those schools who had block schedules, how were music ensembles scheduled? Which should run all year?
Yes. So this past year, Phil, because of COVID, we didn't run our typical ensembles. But I know for next year, the plan is that Christy is going to be running our band program during the win block or the flexible time, the advisory time in the morning. So that is going to be, it's a shorter chunk of time, but it's all year long. So it's not going to be every day. I don't remember what they ended up deciding. She was working with the schedule team on that, but multiple days a week, but then every day throughout every week, that's when she's going to be running band. So, cause that's something, you can't run band for half a year. That doesn't work.
That's hard. And Alex,
okay, thanks, Jay.
I just wanted to say that what I do for my block periods is I have started a book club, a science book club. So Proctor's been really focusing on our literacy initiative and getting the kids reading in every class. So we had large chunks of money, and I bought books ranging from like a first and second grade reading level all the way through high school. I brought about 4 books of each, some fiction, nonfiction, somehow all tied to science. And my kids, it's a choice book. And my kids 3 to 4 times a week, I would say, have like a 10 to 15 minute chunk of independent reading time. So working on that literacy initiative, it's also flex for them. If they finish early and they've done their choice activity, you need to grab your independent reading book, set your own timer, read it in there. And then I normally have questions, I'd say like once a week, book reflection questions that check in. They would meet together with the same type of book that they're reading and talk about it. But the kids really, I was impressed about how much they really got into the books they were reading. And, my highest level readers were flying through books. But it's a way to ensure that they're independently and quietly doing something while all the other kids are still working.
Love that idea, Alex. Thank you for sharing. That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's kind of one. I know that was a whole bunch of time, but that's kind of 2 of the different models of utilizing the time. So one is that like high engagement lab style thing where we're doing the thing, the whole block. And it doesn't have to be a science lab. It could be other type, each content area has their own kind of thing of like, this is what we would do and we would actually spend the whole time. So like maybe, maybe in social studies, you have the students researching and preparing for a debate and they actually, they do that as a lead up. And then one of the blocks is actually debate day, and they do that. And I know like Greg still did his like mock trial stuff. So like the trials used to have to get split up over multiple days. Now he can fit more of the trial in one sitting without having to break it up. So things like that would be that kind of lab style where you spend the whole day on it. And then I said kind of those 20-minute chunks where you're, as a whole class, you're doing the same thing, but you're breaking it up into different chunks. But then there's also ways to split things up where the students are doing all sorts of different stuff. So you can think of that as more of like a stations rotations model, which this year with COVID, I couldn't have them physically move between stations. But so it was kind of more of virtual stations of like, okay, you're going to start off, you can pick which station you're going to do. So, and you can do them in any order. Sometimes we group the kids. So now that we're losing some of those COVID restrictions, thankfully, for next year, it could be actual physical stations. So like, for example, in my lab, I would have, an activity on station 1, an activity on station 2, 3, 4, however many there is. And I divvy the time up and I tell kids, okay, I assign them to their stations, and then we set the timer and we say, okay, off you go, work on your station activity. And then when it's time, let's all rotate. So that's another type of way to do it. That way the kids can work collaboratively in groups, but they don't have to all be doing the same thing at the same time. I've also done a lot of work with students over the years of getting them to that student-directed learning where they really know, like, this is, when I give them their unit plan at the beginning, they know this is what I've got to do throughout the unit. At this point, it's worked better with my older students. So any of you guys who have like juniors and seniors, if you've been working with them on this kind of stuff, by the time they're a junior and a senior, they're a lot more responsible for their own learning, and they, a lot of them will take more ownership of it. So for example, my AP Physics class was extremely self-driven. At the beginning of each unit, here's the guide, here's the plan, here's what you need to accomplish. And depending on the day, we were able to have a decent amount of independent work time where I was then floating around and helping students as they worked on a variety of different tasks. So it was kind of that everybody's just working on something kind of classroom, but I made sure we didn't start with that. We started by doing things together and working our way through, oh, sorry, my motion sensor went off. We started by working in much more structured ways. And then as the class was ready for it, then I released that control to the point where they could be the one running the day. And I see Jess asked, does AP run both semesters? It depends on the class. We learned a lot this year. This year we ran our AP English class full year in a block because, it's an AP class. So we were okay with giving it extra minutes. And the kids were all okay with that because they're seniors. So they weren't really worried about, like credit hours or any of that kind of stuff. Because the question became like, oh, well, does it become a 2-credit AP English? And we were like, well, no, but they just had the extra time. But they were all okay with that. So that's how we did it for this past year. And that one worked really, really well. My AP Physics class, we just ran for the fall semester. That way they were able to finish all of the content. However, they then had a gap before taking the exam in May because we finished at the end of January and their exam wasn't until May. What I attempted to do was to, when I had their, I left their Google Classroom up and we were also utilizing Khan Academy. I left all of that stuff up and active, and I once a week posted, oh, okay, nice. Jay just put in the chat, AP English is going to be 2 credits for Quarry Valley for next year. So cool. That solved that problem. So anyway, so I did that. And so throughout the spring semester, I was posting, review practice activities, questions on AP Classroom for them to do. Unfortunately, because my class was mostly seniors, the senioritis kicked in. They said, do I have to? So realistically, a small handful of the class did actually follow through with doing review. And then as we approached the actual exam, I scheduled dedicated time during advisory for them to come do review with me like actual in-person review with me. The few who did utilize that, it worked fine. It was good. The ones who decided that they were checked out and they were done and they didn't care what they got on the AP exam, I mean, you're going to have those kids any year. So whether it's fresh or not, you know, that's where it's at. We decided for next year that, because so this past year AP biology didn't run. For next year, Sarah's going to teach the AP biology class, and that one has a much bigger lab component than physics does. So that one we scheduled like AP English. So it's going to be a block but full year class. That way there's enough time for it. And then I see Matt was asking if Greg Mott is on the call. Yeah. I'm guessing you're asking about his AP history class.
Yeah, we talked quite a bit about that because I had a group too this year, and he found one of the big struggles is there's not enough independent. There's not the students cannot accomplish the reading requirement in half a year, and that course is really designed around students are doing their background reading ahead at home from their textbook so that they're ready for the in-depth class lessons. And I know he shared with me, he basically found that it's almost like an undoable course in half a year.
Yeah, and I don't know what the decision was made for that for next year, if that was also switched to full year or not. We had to kind of, like this year was that, unfortunately, it was kind of an experimental year. We had to kind of figure out which ones can we do in half a year, which ones need longer. So it's going to kind of depend. So yeah, so if that was one that it really didn't work, I'm sure he gave that feedback to the scheduling team. So I'm not sure where that landed. I wasn't part of that process, but yeah, that's something that we had to just kind of figure out for each course because they're all a little different.
Okay, I see hands up all over the place. This is awesome. This is a great conversation. I don't want to skip over some of the comments that are a little bit farther up. They were talking specifically about special education.
Oh, yeah. Tom was mentioning, so structurally, rather than do special ed for an entire 80-minute block, our special educators divided each of the 80 blocks into 2 40-minute sessions. So that way, because most of the students' IEPs had their direct instruction was not for 80 minutes a day. Like that's a lot. So they divvied theirs up so that their 4 blocks turned into kind of 8 periods. And then they would pick time so that they were pulling the kids from an elective class rather than one of their core classes. So for example, Tom pulled kids from my astronomy class, which is an elective. So I set up the class with the kids so that when they had to miss part of my class, that they would still be okay workload wise. And I arranged it so that, I knew Tom was going to have them for the second half. So I made sure that things that they needed to be with me for was happening during the first half before they went to him. And then the second half was stuff that I could excuse them from so that they could go do their direct instruction. And as an elective class, that works. And it worked really well for us this year from my perspective. And Tom could speak to that more if there were any issues, but that was kind of how we handled special ed scheduling wise.
Yeah, I thought it worked very well, Elena.
Yeah.
I'm on here too, Alina. I think it worked well. Hi. I had one group of students who was a little bit resistant to leave their class, but I think that's just them as humans and not necessarily indicative of all special ed students. But for the most part, it really did work well.
Yes, I would have to send them to Wendy because they didn't want to leave.
Yes. I would be like, where are my kids? And I'd call down and they'd be like, yep, they're on their way, but they would take their sweet time.
Mm-hmm.
Jay, you have your hand raised.
Okay, and I didn't want to skip over if David Berman still had a question too. So I had taught, folks, I taught for 12 years in a block, 75 minutes, both at middle school and high school level. And David, I was and Tom, special educator at that level also. I was half special ed, half social studies for a number of years. I I always did. And Alina, thank you. I used to do 3 to 4 activities in 75-minute block. There's no way those that tried lecturing for 75 minutes had an utter fail very quickly. What I was going to say is I taught AP psychology for 7 or 8 years of that. That is the one class that we did run for half a year, and it was a horse race, I will tell you, to try to do that. And the rest of our APs ran, just like music, ran all year because we needed that. We did get a lot of pushback over the years for foreign language and for mathematics, that it was hard. My own kids went through a semestered high school themselves with that, and there was, if you had a big gap, like you took something in the fall and then you didn't take that math class in the spring or the following fall, and now it's the spring again of the following year, you may have had a full year since you've had math instruction or foreign language instruction. Yeah, that is hard. That is, I'm not going to lie, that is really hard. So a lot of those higher level classes, like the APs, we used to run full both semesters. It was the only way to do it. But the kids are also pretty resilient. And I don't want to speak for Poultney and for Proctor, but one of the things that we have done here, because Lauren, our guidance counselor, was able to really work on it, is we're running the middle school as a schedule within a schedule next year. And I actually have talked to a few of the middle school teachers who are on this call about that, where they're given back-to-back blocks. And so the 4 core classes are all scheduled for those 2 blocks, first and second semester, and they can rearrange the kids any way they want during those 2 blocks for the entire year. And those that I have talked to were pretty excited about having that autonomy. And we also are doing it for our foundations classes, which are geared towards our special ed population at the high school, where those foundations classes are also back-to-back blocks, and we're going to run those as 40-minute or 38-minute periods per se, and be able to have those classes run all year. So there's a lot of opportunity to think out of the box as an administrator, a guidance counselor. There's always a give to a get. And when I know why we're doing the semestered schedules, which is so we have greater opportunities. We actually have 7 new classes that were available by getting on a semestered schedule with all 3 high schools. And that's pretty exciting for our kids. The downside is there is going to be some growing pains. And I know the first year I grew up with 37-minute periods, and that's the way I was taught. And taught for the first several years of my teaching career. And then I come to Vermont and it's all block. And that was in 1994 when we went to that. So there was some growing pains for me personally. And but what I can say is with my own kids going through it, and they're both very different learners, they did okay. They really did okay. And they were AP honors kids, both of them. So, it will take, and one thing that the superintendent has said is we're going to reevaluate it at the end of this year. I know, Alina, you guys at Proctor were kind of thrown into it very, very, very last minute. And we're incredibly resilient. We're going to end up having to do the same thing as a district at the end of this first year. I think we're going to learn a lot. Sorry, I'll jump off now, but I'm on the committee, so I figured I'd help.
Thanks,
Jay, that's awesome. Thank you so much. And that actually segues right into another question that I have for Alina, and that is, whenever we're starting something new like this, we always have what we like to call bright spots and belly flops, right? There's things that went really well, and there's things that didn't go so well. So can you maybe speak to some of those things that didn't go so well and what your thinking process was or your strategies of how that would work?
Okay. So some of the challenges. Each group of kids, as everybody knows, is totally different. So some of the things that worked really well with one group of kids in terms of the amount that I could release control to them, the amount of independence I could trust them with. When I tried the same thing with a new group of kids the spring semester, I had some rough blocks where, you know, they showed me that they were not ready for that when I thought they would be. So I had to then rein things back in and say, like, okay, we tried that. That was what happened yesterday was not okay. We're going to try it this way today. And I was just very honest and transparent with the kids about it. That way they knew why we were switching things up. Like, hey, like for example, my engineering class, they were a behaviorally challenged group of students and this spring semester. So I would have project days set up where we would do some sort of, you know, instruction together as a group. And then I would say, like, okay, for the next chunk of time, work on this assignment. And then in a little bit, we'll switch it up and we'll start the next phase of the project. So, okay, off they go. They're supposed to be reading their, you know, they had like 2 articles to read and some questions to look at so that they would be ready for the next phase in, you know, like 20, 30 minutes. Well, the amount of redirection they needed because they would not read their stinking articles, which I was like, my other groups had no problem with this. Why is this not working? So sure enough, the next phase of the lesson comes around and I spent that time, instead of supporting students, I was having to go around and like, no, get back on, you know, why are you on YouTube? Get back on this page. Why are you doing that? Get back on this page. So it was like, kind of, for me, it felt like a classroom management nightmare. Learned that lesson. Okay, that doesn't work for this group. So the next day, because then sure enough, when we get to the, like, nobody was ready for that next phase of the lesson because most of them didn't actually read the articles like they were supposed to. So, so the next day I was like, all right, guys, we're switching it up. We're going to do things a little differently. So I was like, yesterday we had these articles to read and I noticed that, you know, only X amount of the class actually read the articles. So today, let's try going over this stuff together. So I switched things up so that I still utilize the information from the article, but I presented it to them in a different way. And I was like, we're going to just do this as a whole group. And that's what that particular group, they needed a lot of structure. So I couldn't give them as much independence as I could one of my other classes because they just couldn't handle it. And that was okay. So I just had to structure every minute of the day for that group. So I figured out, like, okay, this class can't have freedom. And that was okay. By the very end of the semester, when we got to our last couple of projects, they finally started to get it. So as we got to our last couple of projects, when it was actual hands-on building day, and I had all the materials out, then they would actually be able to engage in physically constructing whatever it was and do that for like 45 minutes of sustained focus on doing their construction, because that was the hands-on, like, I'm going to actually build my Mars rover. I'm going to actually build my rocket. And for those kids, that was engaging enough that they could actually focus for that length of time. Whereas all of the other things we did, I had to break them into like 10-minute chunks for that group because, I mean, I had a lot of ADHD kids in the group. 10 minutes max, we had to switch. So it was just getting to know the group and realizing that, okay, for this class, I can't even do 4 20-minute chunks. I've got to have like a ton of really short things for us to do because otherwise we're just going to be a mess. So that was probably the biggest belly flop I experienced. Was that group.
Alina, coming as like an elementary teacher frame of mind, I'm thinking like when we start the school year off, we have the first 6 weeks of school. So we have that responsive classroom sort of idea. When you are in middle school and high school, is there something that you can do or that you do that's along those sort of lines to build like that classroom community, expectations, that kind of idea?
Yes, I just typically, because I generally have high schoolers, it doesn't usually take them as long to do that as they do at the younger grades. And then the other thing that, it was partly on me was when we had the semester change. Rather than think of it as a totally like fresh start, a fair number of the kids were ones that I had the previous semester, so they were already used to my like COVID classroom routines, whereas others weren't. So I think I kind of rushed it a little bit the second semester. In the fall, I did a much better job of making sure that we built our, our COVID classroom culture to the extent that we could, and we focused on that considerably for the first few weeks. When we changed semesters, I think I probably jumped in too fast and needed to, even though they were used to the COVID rules of the school, we didn't take quite the same amount of time to get that going in our room. And I think that's probably part of why I flopped more with that particular group. The other groups were just more responsible students, so they were fine with my more abbreviated culture building. They picked up on it a lot faster. But yeah, so that was something to consider, is that going into that fresh semester, even if you've got some repeat students, unless the whole class is a repeat with you, build a fresh culture. Like, it is a fresh class, it's a fresh group, so you gotta treat it that way. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. So we have about 3 minutes. Are there any last minute questions, comments?
Actually, before we go to that, there's one other thing, because I want to share my personal bright spot bit with
this. Go for it.
Yeah. So one of my personal bright spot bits with this was that as a teacher who is a singleton, yes, I'm in a science department, but I'm the only one who teaches chemistry, physics, engineering, astronomy, AP Bio, AP Chem, like you name it. I'm the only one who does it in my building. Every year, I have had a slightly different slate of classes to teach. I also end up doing independent studies because I want some of the AP kids who there's not enough kids to run their class to be able to still do it and whatnot. So I've always been slammed with curriculum, planning, grading, all of that, managing all the different classes. To be able to focus on only 3 classes per semester was ridiculously refreshing. I felt such a huge weight off because, yes, it was more minutes, but it was the same 3 subjects. So like I mentioned, I had astronomy, chemistry, and physics in the fall semester. It was amazing to be able to devote all of my time and energy just to 3 classes. I was able to do such a better job, even with all of the COVID stuff and all of the digital stuff and everything. So much of a better job than I would have if I had to do that across all of a full year's worth of classes. And then again, another huge, I've never experienced this before, but then the spring semester, astronomy and chemistry ran again. So I had already prepared those materials in the fall, and I got to just make updates and reuse it for the spring. Reuse post from Google Classroom, reuse post from Google Classroom. Oh my God, it was amazing. My physics class had ended and my engineering class started. So then for the spring semester, I was just updating materials for 2 of the classes. And one of the class, I was developing all of their new digital COVID stuff. But being able to do that was, in terms of teacher workload, I think that's the only reason I've come out of this COVID year slightly sane. Not totally, but a little bit, was because of the fact that I wasn't trying to do 6 classes at a time all year long. I wouldn't have made it. So that was my bright spot for that, is just to kind of keep that in mind. And that also kind of answers, I think, Wendy's question, Wendy Dowse, about alternating days so that the blocks go all year long, but every other day. As a school, we had decided, because especially this year because of COVID, we were going to do fall semester, spring semester for that very reason. Teachers and students can focus on less things at a time and then switch gears and then just start fresh and focus on the new stuff. So that's why as a school we had done that. And I think that is the plan for the district as a whole. And having experienced that versus I've also Proctor, way back, we did a hybrid periods and blocks thing all year, and that was messier and harder. This was a much easier model to use. It was less confusing for the kids because they know where they have to go every day. We've done 8A, B-Day stuff. It is not fun. So, yeah. All right. So
Thank you, Lena.
I don't mind staying on for if anybody has questions and they want to stay on the call for longer. That is totally fine with me. But thank you guys.
Thank you, Melina. That was awesome. And Jay, thank you for sharing your experiences too. That's helpful.